Both unions recommended the deal. More than 70% of workers said no. That is where this story starts, because that number is the one thing the H.S.E, the government, and most of the media coverage today cannot comfortably explain. Ireland's ambulance workers are on strike this morning, 2,000 of them, every base in the country. That part is in the headlines. What is not in the headlines is why a workforce rejected a settlement that its own union leadership told it to accept. Not once, but twice. That is the question that unlocks everything else about today. Here is what you need to know before anything else. The National Ambulance Service is running at 46% staffing as of 8 o'clock this morning. The Health Service Executive has warned of significant delays to non-life-threatening calls and has told the public to consider making their own way to hospital if they can. That advice from the state's own health service is the clearest signal available about how serious the capacity problem is right now. This is also not the end of the action. A 48-hour stoppage is scheduled for the 19th of May, a 72-hour stoppage on the 26th, further action in June. Each round is longer than the one before. The clock on the 19th is already running, and as of this morning, there is no resolution in sight. Which brings us back to the number that started this, 70%. Two separate deals, both recommended by both unions, both rejected by the workers themselves. To understand why, you need to understand what was actually being offered and what was being asked for in return. Before we get into the mechanics of that, quick one. Drop into the comments and tell me where you are watching from and whether you have a full 12 minutes right now or just a few. I am genuinely curious about the geography of whoever is paying attention to this. Right. Back to the picket lines. I am not the one saying this carries a risk to life. Professor Connor Deasy of the Irish Association of Emergency Medicine said on News Talk this morning, and I am choosing his words deliberately, that there is a significant risk to life and that the situation should never have reached this point. That sentence was not said carelessly. Doctors of that seniority do not throw language like that at a microphone without meaning it. The Irish Patients Association issued a statement this morning describing the dispute as having moved beyond a routine industrial relations matter and into an area of legitimate patient safety concern. They were careful to say they were not calling for political interference in the outcome of negotiations. What they were calling for was urgent engagement between all parties before the risks to patients deepened further. The H.S.E, for its part, said its contingency plan is in place, that the 999 service is fully operational, and that priority will be given to cardiac arrests, respiratory emergencies, and serious trauma from road accidents. And then it said something that tells you more about the situation than any press release. It advised people with less time-critical emergencies to consider making their own way to hospital. The service is telling you today that if you can get yourself to an emergency department, you should. Taoiseach Micheál Martin, speaking in County Kildare this morning, acknowledged the transformation of the ambulance service and the pressure that population growth has placed on it. He called for the dispute to be resolved through the established industrial relations machinery, saying the state had good mechanisms for resolving exactly this kind of dispute. That is the government's public position as of this morning, and it is, notably, the same position as the Minister for Health. None of that, however, is the real issue. The real issue is a ladder with a rung missing. And to understand where that rung went, you need to go back to 2020. One thing worth holding before we do. Yesterday, the Medical Board of University Hospital Limerick formally warned the Minister for Health that patient safety risks there remain intolerable. Today, the ambulances that serve the same region are running at 46% capacity. 2 pressure points. Same system, same week. That is the environment in which this dispute is now escalating. Molten 2020 was the year an independent review of roles and responsibilities inside the National Ambulance Service was completed. The review found something that anyone who has called an ambulance in the last decade would not find surprising, that the job had changed dramatically. What had been a patient transport service had become something closer to a mobile clinical unit. Emergency medical technicians and paramedics were administering significantly more medications than they had in 2011. By some accounts, the increase ran to 89% for EMTs alone. Advanced paramedics were making clinical decisions and delivering interventions at roadside and at scene that a generation ago would have required a hospital. The training requirements had expanded, the qualifications had expanded, the legal responsibilities had expanded. The review said the pay scales needed to reflect that. The recommendation was clear, independent, and documented. Here is what happened next. The H.S.E. acknowledged the findings. The government acknowledged the findings. Neither side disputes that the job changed. The disagreement, and this is the precise mechanism of the dispute, is that the H.S.E. would only implement the pay recommendations if workers simultaneously agreed to further future changes in working conditions and service transformation. The workers' position is that the job already changed. The changes were already made. The pay is owed for work already done, not for promises about what might happen next. That distinction is the whole dispute in one sentence. Here is what the H.S.E. offered. In July of last year, it and the government accepted proposals from the Workplace Relations Commission and the Labor Court. Both union leaderships, SIP2 and Unite, recommended those proposals to their members. Proposals included pay improvements of between 3 and 14%, on top of a 9.25% increase already agreed under the 2024 to 2026 Public Sector Pay Agreement. On paper, that is a significant package. The H.S.E. said it clearly represented progress. Here's what the workers heard. They heard, "We will pay you more, but only if you commit to doing more still." After 6 years of already doing more without additional pay, that framing landed differently on the shop floor than it did in the press release. Unite's General Secretary described it as scandalous that frontline workers have been waiting 6 years for their skills and expertise to be recognized. SIP2's ambulance sector organizer said members had been left with no option but to act. Both union leaderships had recommended the deal. Their members overruled them. More than 70% of workers who voted said no. There is the answer to the question this script opened with. The workers were not offered recognition for work already done. They were offered payment conditional on work not yet agreed. After 6 years of that pattern, the ballot result was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention. It was the mathematics of exhausted trust. When a workforce overrules its own union leadership, twice, that is not a negotiating tactic. It is a verdict. If the level of analysis you just heard is what has been missing from your feed, this channel is where it lives. No spin, no hysteria. Now, back to what happens next. But all of that is still abstract. Here is what it means for the person in Clare, in North Tipperary, or in Limerick who needs an ambulance today, or on the 19th of May, or on the 26th. The National Ambulance Service, running at 46% staffing, means fewer vehicles, longer response times on non-life-threatening calls, and more distance for ambulances to cover between calls. That is not opinion, that is arithmetic, and it gets worse at each escalation point. A 48-hour stoppage is not 48 hours of today's situation. It is longer, with less recovery time built in, at the start of a period when any resolution requires negotiation that has, so far, not happened. Minister for Health Jennifer Carroll McNeil has said this is an industrial relations matter. The Irish Association of Emergency Medicine used the phrase significant risk to life. The association used the phrase legitimate patient safety concern. The Department of Health is using the phrase industrial relations structure. Those three descriptions are not describing the same situation, and the gap between them is where the risk to the public sits today. For those watching from the United Kingdom or the United States, if you have family in the Midwest, in Clare, in Limerick, in North Tipperary, this is the emergency service your family is depending on today. And if this dispute is not resolved before the 19th of May, it will be less available on that date than it is right now. The public version of this story is accurate. It is also incomplete. What headlines describe as a pay dispute is actually the visible consequence of a system that asked frontline workers to professionalize a service, watched them do it, published an independent report confirming they had done it, and then declined, for 6 years, to make the pay follow the job. The ladder was promised. The rung was never fitted. The next meaningful decision point is the minister. The H.S.E. and the unions have not moved their positions since strike notice was served a month ago. If that does not change before the 19th of May, the 48-hour stoppage begins on schedule, and the 26th brings something longer again. Watch for whether the minister moves from industrial relations language to direct engagement. That is the only variable that changes the calendar now. The 19th of May is 7 days away.